Richard Feynman read fewer textbooks than his classmates. He took fewer notes. He skipped entire chapters. His peers spent 12 hours covering material he finished in 4. Yet he understood physics at a depth that won him a Nobel Prize. When colleagues struggled to explain quantum mechanics to undergraduates, Feynman made it simple. When NASA needed someone to find what killed 7 astronauts, they called him. When the world's top physicists gathered, they listened when he spoke. The paradox destroys everything schools taught you about reading. Because Feynman wasn't reading, he was reconstructing. And the difference between these two actions explains why you finish books but can't use what you read. The traditional approach seems logical. Open to page 1, read linearly, highlight important passages, take notes in margins, review before tests. Schools have taught this method for over a century. Millions of students follow it religiously. Yet something breaks in the process. You finish the book. You feel accomplished. The highlighted sections glow with importance. The notes stack up in neat files. But 3 weeks later, someone asks you to explain the core concept, and you freeze. The information vanished. You consumed 300 pages but retained almost nothing usable. This isn't a memory problem, it's a method problem. Schools confuse consumption with learning because consumption is measurable. You can track pages read, chapters completed, notes taken. But understanding, that's invisible. That's why they don't teach it. Feynman discovered the problem early in his academic career. At MIT in the late 1930s, he watched peers drown in physics textbooks. They read everything, highlighted everything, remembered nothing deeply. While preparing for his graduate qualifier exams at Princeton, he noticed a pattern. Students who covered the most material understood it the least. Students who memorized formulas couldn't derive them. Students with perfect notes couldn't apply concepts to new problems. As he later wrote in, "Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman," there's a crucial difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Most reading produces the first. His method forced the second. The technique seemed inefficient at first. While his roommate covered 30 pages per night, Feynman might finish 10. But when exam time came, the roommate struggled to apply concepts. Feynman rebuilt entire theories from first principles. The difference wasn't intelligence, it wasn't speed, it was method. And it started with something schools never teach, reading with a target, not a syllabus. To understand how this worked, we need to see what he actually did. And it began before he even opened a book. Princeton, 1940. Feynman faces a wall of physics textbooks for his doctoral work. Most graduate students begin with Chapter 1 and march forward dutifully. Feynman does something that seems backward. He starts with a problem. A specific question he cannot answer. Before touching any textbook, he writes at the top of a blank page, "Why does the Dirac equation predict antimatter?" Only then does he hunt for relevant sections. He ignores introductions that review basic concepts he already knows, skips chapters on topics he mastered at MIT, targets exactly what he needs to answer his question, nothing more. His classmates read for coverage. Feynman reads for answers. This inversion changes everything at the cognitive level. When you open a textbook to Chapter 1 because the syllabus demands it, your brain has no anchor point. The information floats by without connecting to anything meaningful. You're in passive reception mode, letting words wash over you. But when you start with a specific question, a genuine gap in your understanding, your brain activates differently. It searches for patterns, tests each new piece of information against your question, accepts what helps, discards what doesn't, maintains focus because you're hunting, not consuming. As Feynman explained in his lectures at Caltech years later, you can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird. So let's look at the bird and see what it's doing. That's what counts. The same applies to reading. You can know all the chapter titles, all the key terms, all the highlighted passages. But if you can't rebuild the concept without looking, you don't know it. This principle applies directly today when you're reading technical documentation for AWS certification, studying business frameworks from good to great, or learning React from online tutorials. Before opening the resource, write the specific question. How does React's virtual DOM actually improve performance? Or, What makes Southwest Airlines profitable when other airlines fail? Then read only to answer that question. Skip the rest. This prevents the most common self-learning trap of our era: tutorial hell. You're not trying to complete the course or finish the book. You're trying to eliminate one specific gap in your knowledge. But identifying the question was just the first step. What Feynman did next seemed even more wasteful. After reading 3 pages about the Dirac equation, Feynman closed the textbook, didn't highlight, didn't underline, didn't take notes in the margins, closed it completely. Then he turned to a blank page in his notebook and attempted to explain the concept in his own words, from memory, without looking back. The first attempt failed. He remembered the terminology but couldn't rebuild the logic. The equations appeared, but their derivation vanished. The conclusion made sense, but the path to it disappeared. Most students would reopen the book and reread everything, highlighting more passages the second time. Feynman did something more surgical. He noted exactly where his explanation broke down. I can't explain why the equation needs to be relativistic, or I don't understand how spin emerges from the math. Then he reopened the book, read only that specific section, sometimes just one paragraph, closed it again, and tried once more to reconstruct the entire explanation. He repeated this cycle until he could teach the concept to an empty room without any reference material. His roommate thought he was wasting time. Look at the contrast in their textbooks after one semester. The roommates, covered in neon highlighter, margins stuffed with notes, every important passage marked with stars and exclamation points. Feynman's, nearly pristine, maybe a dozen brief annotations total. But here's what the physical evidence couldn't show. The roommate's notes were decorations. They created an illusion of learning. When tested, he could recite passages but not explain principles. He knew what the book said, but not what it meant. Feynman's blank reconstructions were diagnostics. They revealed exactly what he didn't understand. No hiding. No false confidence. Why does this work when highlighting fails? Because your brain tricks you with familiarity. When you highlight a passage, your brain registers recognition. I know this. I marked it. It's important. But familiarity is not understanding. It's just pattern recognition. You can recognize someone's face without knowing their name. You can recognize a physics equation without understanding its derivation. You can recognize a business framework without being able to apply it. Recognition is passive. Understanding is active. Feynman eliminated recognition by forcing reconstruction. When you close the book and face a blank page, there's nowhere to hide. Either you can rebuild the concept, or you can't. Either you understand the logic, or you memorize the conclusion. The blank page doesn't lie. As he later explained when describing his approach to physics problems, what I cannot create, I do not understand. The same applies to reading. What you cannot reconstruct, you do not understand. This principle solves the biggest problem in modern self-learning: the gap between consuming content and building competence. You watch a YouTube tutorial on Python. You follow along. The code makes sense while the instructor explains it. You feel like you're learning, but the next day you face a blank text editor and freeze. Nothing comes. You consume the tutorial, but you can't reconstruct the logic. The solution is brutal, but effective. After watching each major section, close the video. Open a blank file. Try to write the code from memory. When you fail, and you will fail, note exactly where you got stuck. Rewatch only that 30-second segment. Close it. Try again. This is how you transform passive watching into active understanding. But Feynman added another layer that most people skip entirely. Los Alamos, 1943. The Manhattan Project assembles the world's top physicists. Security protocols prevent them from explaining their work to outsiders. Feynman develops a habit. Late at night, he stands at a blackboard in an empty room and teaches. The room is empty, but he explains quantum mechanics, bomb design calculations, uranium enrichment, as if presenting to undergraduates who know nothing. He uses simple language, draws diagrams, rebuilds equations from scratch. When he stumbles over an explanation, he stops, marks the concept, returns to it the next day. His colleagues think he's rehearsing lectures. They're wrong. He's testing understanding. Because here's what Feynman discovered. You can fool yourself with notes. You can fool yourself with recognition. But You cannot fool yourself when teaching. Teaching forces you to organize knowledge, anticipate questions, simplify without losing accuracy, and expose every gap in your logic. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it deeply. And if you can't explain it to someone who knows nothing, you've memorized without comprehending. This became his ultimate diagnostic tool. Years later, when developing the Feynman lectures on physics, he insisted on teaching freshman undergraduates, not graduate students. Graduate students would nod along, filling in gaps with their existing knowledge. Freshmen would look confused at the exact points where Feynman's explanation failed. Their confusion was a gift. It showed him precisely what he hadn't made clear. As he wrote in the preface to those lectures, "I don't believe I can really do a good job of explaining anything unless I can explain it to a freshman." The same principle applies when you're studying cloud architecture, learning behavioral psychology, or mastering SQL queries. After reading a chapter, don't test yourself with multiple choice questions. Those test recognition. Instead, open a voice memo app and explain the concept aloud, as if teaching someone who's never heard of it. Use analogies, draw connections, simplify without dumbing down. The exact moments you hesitate, fumble for words, or resort to jargon, those are your knowledge gaps, not the sections you forgot, the sections you thought you understood but can't articulate. That's the difference between recognition and reconstruction. The first lets you pass tests. The second lets you solve real problems. But there was one more piece to Feynman's system that made everything else possible. Caltech, 1960s. Feynman maintains a notebook with an unusual title, Notebook of Things I Don't Know About. Not a record of what he learned, a record of what he hadn't learned yet. Inside, lists of concepts he couldn't explain, problems he couldn't solve, questions he couldn't answer. Some entries stay for months, others get crossed off after targeted reading. The notebook isn't comprehensive. It doesn't try to cover all of physics. It maps his ignorance. And that map becomes his reading curriculum. Most people read to cover material. Feynman read to eliminate specific ignorance. His classmates would. Read Introduction to Quantum Mechanics from cover to cover, because that's what comprehensive students do. Feynman would skip to chapter 7, because that's where his notebook said he didn't understand commutation relations. He'd read those 12 pages, test himself through reconstruction. If successful, cross it off the list. If unsuccessful, identify the prerequisite he was missing and hunt for that. His reading wasn't linear, it was surgical. This approach contradicted everything schools taught. Professors assigned textbooks to be read completely, in order, without skipping. Feynman treated textbooks like reference databases. You don't read databases cover to cover, you query them for specific information. The goal isn't coverage, the goal is targeted elimination of ignorance. As he later advised students, study hard what interests you the most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible. The efficiency gain was massive. While classmates spent equal time on concepts they already understood and concepts they didn't, Feynman allocated 0 time to the first category and all his time to the second. While they read defensively, covering everything in case it appeared on the exam, he read offensively, attacking only his weak points. By the time they finished one comprehensive textbook, he'd solved 12 specific gaps using 7 different sources. His knowledge became deeper but more targeted. Not encyclopedic. Applicable. This is how you learn in the age of infinite content. You can't read everything. Attempting to read everything paralyzes you, but you can identify your ignorance. Maintain your own things I don't understand list. Maybe it's, I don't know how JWT authentication actually works, or I don't understand why some companies scale and others don't, or I can't explain why the Fed raising interest rates affects stock prices. That list becomes your curriculum. Read only to eliminate items from it. Skip everything else without guilt. Clarity about your gaps is more valuable than comprehensive coverage of material you'll forget. When you combine these 4 elements, targeted questioning before reading, forced reconstruction after reading, teaching as a diagnostic, and gap-focused curriculum, you get something schools never teach, true comprehension. This is why Feynman could explain quantum mechanics to undergraduates when other Nobel laureates couldn't explain it to each other. This is why his lectures became legendary. This is why he could walk into the Challenger investigation with no aerospace background and identify the O-ring failure in days while engineers with decades of experience missed it. This is why he won the Nobel Prize solving problems others had memorized but never understood. But more importantly, this reveals a deeper truth about learning itself. Reading is not information transfer, it's cognitive reconstruction. The book is not the teacher. Your ability to rebuild the concept without the book, that's understanding. Schools confuse consumption with learning because consumption is measurable. Pages read, chapters completed, notes taken, courses finished. But reconstruction, that's invisible. That's why they don't teach it. They can't test it efficiently. They can't grade it objectively. They can't track it in a learning management system. So they optimize for consumption. And they produce students who finish books but can't use them, who complete courses but can't apply them, who pass tests but can't solve problems. Feynman rejected that system in 1939 and built his own, and the evidence suggests his system worked better. As he once explained, I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. I was never satisfied with just knowing the name. Feynman's reading method was just one layer of his learning system, but it exposed something fundamental: the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Schools optimize for the former because it's testable. Feynman optimized for the latter because it's usable. The next time you open a technical book, a business manual, or an online course, remember, reading is not the goal, reconstruction is. Start with a specific question, read to answer it, close the source, rebuild the concept on a blank page. Test yourself by teaching. Maintain a list of your ignorance and read only to eliminate it. This is how you absorb information in a world designed to make you consume without understanding. This is how you transform coverage into comprehension. This is how you stop reading like a student and start learning like Feynman.